So I'm going to discuss this paper in to be published in the International Review of Law and Economics by Professor Ramzaya from Harvard University, and it concerns about the fate of some ladies in during the war from the Korean Peninsula. It has been, as you know, really controversial point in the relationship between Japan and Korea. And my stance always have been that these kind of things should be considered in the light of human rights and universal values today. And we shouldn't really analyze them just in terms of the socio-economical situations at that time, because otherwise we wouldn't do justice to these historical events. And having said that, so this paper by Professor Ramzaya has caused some outcry from Korea and beyond, and there have been some arguments from the Japanese side. My own view, I am based in Tokyo and I am a resident of Japan. I was born and raised as Japanese, but I always felt that, as I said, these things should be taken with the current values about human rights and personal freedom as a standard. Otherwise, we wouldn't be our true selves. We wouldn't do justice to the human dignity that we are so proud of today. So in that aspect, I have not been in line with the positions held by the Tokyo government or some mayors in Japan. So, having said that, so I am, if you like, liberally oriented, and I am for the individual dignity for these ladies who were unfortunately involved in this dire phase of history. So, having said that, the main problem with this Ramzaya paper doesn't seem to be about historical facts, in my viewpoint. When I read publications in the New Yorker or New York Times, the main argument seems to be around some historical facts, whether there were documentations of some kind, or whether what the paper said can be substantiated by historical facts. For me, a more fundamental and probably crucial defect of the paper is that it applies game theory to this historical fact. Game theory, of course, is a respectable field of science, and it has been applied to, for example, the prisoner's dilemma, hawk-dove dilemma, and also mutually assured destruction. That is the game theoretic approach which would describe the nuclear arms confrontation. And and stag hunt, in which people cooperate to hunt either a hare or a stag. And this game theoretic approach have been effective, and it has led to some Nobel Prizes, at least one, in economics. And so it's a really powerful and respective theoretical tool. But when you think of the fate of these really unfortunate ladies in history, money and payoff functions and game theory, these are not the things that would first in your mind. So Professor Ramzaya tries to analyze these historical events based on game theory, but he does a really poor job of it not because he lacks any analytical thinking or thorough description, but because of the very shortcomings of the approach itself. We are of course moved by monetary rewards from time to time, but that is not that is not actually the only motivation that moves us, and that is a really a really basic aspect of our existence. And even a child would recognize that. So when you try to say something about this phase of history involving Japanese and Korean government, Korea technically at that time was part of Japan, so Koreans at the time were Japanese citizens, so involving mainly the government of Japan and Japanese military. This these series of events are not primarily economic events. I mean, of course, there was some economics involved, and it is possible to analyze that economic aspect using concepts like indenture contracts, and these are from Professor Ramzaya's paper, and compensation for the much higher risks involved, and game theoretic principles of credible commitments, and indenture contracts with a large advance with 1 or 2 year terms. These concepts and these analytic tools are, of course, effective in their very limited way. So for me, the basic flaw, if you like, of this paper is that it doesn't really address the essence of the problem. I mean, the essence of the problem does not lie in economic rationalization or evaluation function and so on. These are actually very trivial matters. And I'm surprised that in this paper, Professor Ramzaya does not offer any further non-trivial results from game theoretic analysis. When you do something about the game theory, you usually arrive at some non-trivial conclusions which are not expected from the premises of the model themselves. So if you do that, that is a successful paper involving game theory. But this Ramzaya paper, unfortunately, just describes or tries to describe the phenomenon in terms of game theory, but does nothing more than that. It's just a description. So there's no conclusion which would shed light on this very unfortunate phase of history. So I should say that this is not a really good paper. I know Professor Ramzaya is a very respected scholar. He studied in the University of Tokyo as a recipient of the fellowship. And yes, he was in University of Tokyo as a Fulbright fellowship, and also he published a book in Japanese, so he can handle some Japanese on law and economics, and he actually received the prestigious Santry Gakugeisho, Santry Academics Award, and which is considered to be one of the highest honors uprising a young academic can receive in Japan. So Professor Ramzaya did some good work, but in this particular paper to be published, or I don't know, there have been arguments about the retraction or denial of publication in this journal. I understand, but this paper in the International Review of Law and Economics, published by Elsevier, does not do a lot of service to in terms of illuminating the nature of this historical event. I mean, it involves a lot of really complex psychology, socially constrained and involving personal freedom and honor, and analyzing this event just in terms of game theory or economic principles is probably sacrilegious. It probably does not actually address humanly whole aspect of the problem. That I think is a much serious problem, much more serious problem, which nobody can argue, compared to the usually disputed historical accuracy, which in itself is a really important issue. But compared to the methodological limitations of this whole approach based on game theory and economic analysis, these issues appear to me side issues. I mean, the most fundamental problem with this paper is that Professor Ramzaya seems to appear that that he thinks that this is sufficient to understand this historical event. By the way, I read the novel Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, and in it there were some mentions of people who were kind of coercing women into this dark side of the war by saying that there were good jobs at factories and so on, which were actually lies. And so there was those socially constrained nuances of this phenomenon. And if you just read Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, you actually realize it's all there to see. I mean, you realize that there are much more than economics or game theory to this phenomenon. And I'm just puzzled why Professor Ramzaya, who appears to be an intelligent person, why he didn't see that. I don't understand why he failed to see the really severe limitations of the game theoretic approach to this very unfortunate phase of Japan-Korea relationship. So that's my review of this paper. Let us be the best of us in terms of being a human, and let us review historical events from the perspectives of the best angels in us all. That's all I want to say.